can I ask the Prime Minister once again, what specific guarantees did he receive from the Chinese government that they would work to de-escalate the conflict in Ukraine?
Zero.
The reason I spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky was to have a discussion with him in advance as precisely the terms in which we would approach this issue. I then followed through on that, and I will talk to President Zelensky again in coming days about this. We're working hand in glove with the Ukrainians for the outcome that we all want, which is just and lasting peace.
Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, and I welcome the PM's successful trade missions to China and Japan. In particular, I'm heartened by the strides made in Japanese cooperation. However, I would like to ascertain what steps forward were made in terms of the Chinese treatment of Christians, of Uyghur Muslims, of Falun Gong and other religious minorities, and how the Prime Minister was able to use diplomatic soft power to bring about the changes required to stop human rights, or to provide human rights protection, and to stop religious persecution and successful trade between the two nations. Thank you.
He's right to raise these really important issues, and that's why I raised them myself during the course of the visit, and I thank him.
And that concludes the statement. I'll give a few moments for the front benches to swap over. Statement. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I know Right Honourable and Honourable members across the House will agree, Jeffrey Epstein was a despicable criminal who committed disgusting crimes and destroyed the lives of countless women and girls. What he did is unforgivable. His victims must be our first priority. As the Prime Minister has said, anybody with relevant information must come forward and cooperate with investigations so that Jeffrey Epstein's victims can get the justice they have been denied for too long. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Friday, the Department of Justice in the United States released around 3 million pages from the case files relating to Jeffrey Epstein. It is increasingly clear that his awful crimes involved and were facilitated by many, often powerful people, both by actively participating in those crimes, but also by failing to hear those victims' voices, by equating wealth with integrity, and by not using one's privileged position to speak out, even against a friend. It is incumbent upon those of us who hold ministerial office to behave in such a way that builds trust in politics and upholds the standards that voters rightly expect from us. Contained within the release by the US Department of Justice were documents which highlighted the close nature of the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson, including alleged financial transactions when Peter Mandelson was a Labour Member of Parliament and later Minister. For the avoidance of doubt, this information was not known by the government until the release of documents by the Department of Justice on Friday. The nature of the documents also raised serious concerns about Peter Mandelson's behaviour whilst a minister. Peter Mandelson must account for his actions and conduct. It is an understatement, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that his decision to continue a close relationship with a convicted paedophile, including discussing private government business, falls far below the standards expected of any minister. His behaviour was unequivocally wrong and an insult to the women and girls who suffered. No government minister of any political party should have, nor ever should, behave in this way. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has today asked the Cabinet Secretary to review all available information regarding Peter Mandelson's contact with Jeffrey Epstein during his period as a government minister and to report back to him as a matter of urgency. As the House knows, Peter Mandelson is no longer a member of the Labour Party, having resigned his membership last night, and the House may wish to know that disciplinary action was underway by the Labour Party prior to his resignation. The Prime Minister believes, as does the Government, that Peter Mandelson should not retain his membership of the House of Lords or use his title. As the House already knows, the Government does not have the power to remove peerages without legislation. However, the Prime Minister is calling on all political parties, including the Conservatives as the largest party in the House of Lords, to work with the Government to modernise the disciplinary procedures to allow for removal of peers who have brought the House of Lords into disrepute. The Government will today write to the appropriate authorities in the other place to start that process. It would be better, Madam Deputy Speaker, to update those procedures so that they apply to all members of the House of Lords, instead of having to introduce complex hybrid bills for each individual peer who has brought the other place into disrepute. Madam Deputy Speaker, I recognise the strength of feeling on all sides of the House, myself included, and the Government will of course keep members up to date. I commend the statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. The crimes of Jeffrey Epstein were truly terrible. Paedophilia, sex trafficking, child prostitution. It was an awful abuse of power. And it is, of course, a great embarrassment to our country that its most senior ambassador should have been caught up with a man like him. In this latest set of releases from the US Department of Justice, it's clearer than ever that theirs was a relationship built not just on affection, but on the transfer of money from Epstein to Mandelson's family and the transfer of information from Mandelson to Epstein. In some cases, this was apparently market-sensitive information that Mandelson only received by dint of being a member of the Labour government. So, of course, we welcome the belated announcement that there will be an investigation into Mandelson's conduct whilst he was a minister. But this should have happened long ago, and I say that because we know that in February last year, Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, wrote to the Cabinet Secretary explicitly asking for an investigation into the veracity of information contained in the Epstein papers about the sale of assets arising from the banking collapse and communications about them between Lord Mandelson and Mr. Epstein. That investigation never happened. In any case, I'm afraid the investigation announced today alone will not do. It is not enough to consider Mandelson's historic conduct. There also needs to be an investigation into his behaviour whilst he was our ambassador in Washington. Given that he abused his previous position, it is entirely conceivable that he abused his most recent one. For example, I understand that on the 27th of February last year, Mandelson arranged for the Prime Minister to meet Palantir, a client of Mandelson's company, Global Counsel. How many more such meetings were there? What other information was shared? We all have a right to know. Likewise, the government cannot hide from its responsibility in having made Mandelson its ambassador in the first place. This was a political appointment. It happened only because of political pressure. And so one of two things must be true, Madam Deputy Speaker. Either there was the most terrible failure of the vetting system, or the government chose to brush that vetting information away. And both are very serious. But the government must now be honest with us about which it was. And it seems very unlikely that the government's vetting system broke down entirely. Indeed, on the 10th of September, the Prime Minister told the House that full due process was followed during this appointment. Can it really be the case that this full due process did not pick up the extent of the relationship? On the 3rd of November, Ollie Robbins, the then Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office, told committee, back before Lord Mandelson was announced as the appointee, there was a process within the Cabinet Office to make sure that the Prime Minister was aware of Lord Mandelson and the issues around his appointment. We can confidently say that the relationship with Epstein was indeed surfaced. So the government knew that Mandelson had a long-maintained and unhealthy relationship with Epstein, and yet it continued with its appointment anyway. So the question is, Madam Deputy Speaker, who in number 10 knew what and when? And the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister has a duty to tell this House precisely what the Prime Minister knew when he made the appointment, to disclose the documents that the Prime Minister saw. And if the Prime Minister genuinely did not know, well, somebody must have done. Who was it? Was it his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, who is reported to have personally pushed the appointment? Was it the Deputy Prime Minister, who was then the Foreign Secretary, who would have been party to some of the information? It's just time for the government to be open and clear with us all. Something went very badly wrong with this appointment, Madam Deputy Speaker. It has caused very great embarrassment to this country, and it is time that someone took responsibility.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The person that has to take responsibility for their failings is Peter Mandelson. The Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster knows, because the process for political appointments, whether to ambassadorships or otherwise, was one that was set up under the previous Conservative government. It was a process that we inherited and have since updated. The Prime Minister has been very clear that the declarations of interest that were put forward by Peter Mandelson were not wholly truthful. When it became clear from the release of information that that had not been the case, the Prime Minister moved swiftly to remove Peter Mandelson as the ambassador to the United States. On the first point that the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster made in relation to an investigation requested by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, I can confirm to the House that his statement was incorrect. Former Prime Minister did ask the Cabinet Secretary to investigate to look for any particular documents that related, as he said, to the sale of RBS assets to JP Morgan. That investigation was undertaken. The Cabinet Secretary did respond to the former Prime Minister to confirm that no documents in relation to these questions were held by the government. Evidently, now that more documents have become available to the public and to the government, further investigations are now taking place.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. These files seem to show that Peter Mandelson was given £50,000 by a notorious paedophile, and a few years later, he sent on market-sensitive information to Epstein, who worked for JP Morgan, about market bailouts, the Prime Minister's resignation, telling them that they should mildly threaten the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and then told him about matters of national security. Surely this is not a matter of whether Peter Mandelson be in the House of Lords. This is a matter of whether the police should be involved.
The Honourable Lady is right that each individual issue is wholly unacceptable, and cumulatively it is also unacceptable. The undeclared exchange of funds, the passing on of government information, let alone the fact that those exchanges were to a convicted paedophile, are wholly unconscionable. And the House will know that if any of those activities were to take place today, ministers would be swiftly relieved of their duties and could be, via the recall petitions available to the House, removed from their constituency too. As to the matter of criminal investigations, of course, that is a matter for the prosecution services and the police, and the investigation into the released documents from the Cabinet Secretary to the Prime Minister, as I've informed the House, is currently underway.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister and the Shadow CDL are right. We must start by remembering the many women and young girls who experienced unimaginable horrors at the hands of the network of Epstein. We must also ask, Madam Deputy Speaker, what it was that first attracted the politician Peter Mandelson to the billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein, and why was it that that relationship continued after Epstein's character was well known. At the very least, the forwarding of confidential government correspondence to a wealthy and powerful individual was clearly well beneath the conduct expected of a cabinet minister and possibly a breach of the law. When that is combined with the reported financial flows, the evidence is damning. The use of public office for private gain is the very definition of corruption. Regardless of the outcome of a government investigation, millions of people up and down this country are more than capable of judging for themselves on the evidence in front of them. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I ask the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, isn't it time to end the Lord Mandelson charade once and for all by bringing legislation to this House to strip him of his peerage? And what about his membership of the Privy Council too? The Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister referenced declarations of interest. So will the government work with House authorities to republish Peter Mandelson's register of interests dating back to his time as a Cabinet Minister in a Labour government?
Thank you, and can I welcome the Honourable Member to his post on the Liberal Democrats' front bench. The Honourable Member is right that it is time for the procedures in Parliament to be updated. This House has taken steps in recent years to do that. The other place has not. And as I said in my statement to the House, the government is making an offer today to the other place and to the appropriate authorities in the House of Lords to put forward proposals to do just that. And if we need to make time available to do so, we will.
Clive Efford.
Deputy Speaker, the key question here is who advised the Prime Minister? I don't expect the Prime Minister to do due diligence on appointments of this kind himself, but those around him must have done. And it does appear that there were questions that needed to be asked of Lord Mandelson that weren't asked, or if they were asked, that the answers were not passed on. So when this is investigated, can my right honourable friend give us a guarantee that those around the Prime Minister who would have advised him on this appointment will be investigated fully?
The appointment for political, the process, for political appointments has since been strengthened by this government to include additional interviews and processes for declarations of interest. The key thing, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, is when someone lies in their declarations of interest, there must be a consequence. And the consequence in respect to members of the other place needs to be removal from the House of Lords and loss of your peerage. That can only happen if the other place bring forward proposals to update their own processes, which the government stands ready to support them in doing so. But I agree with my honourable friend that there needs to be robust, clear, transparent processes, and where there are conflicts of interest, for those to be surfaced and dealt with adequately. And then when people are found to have lied, there must be some consequence.
Chair of the Select Committee, Simon Hall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is right to say that the other place must modernise its disciplinary procedures. But that kicks the Mandelson can down the road. This is not the first time this modern-day Icarus has flown a little bit too close to the sun, usually over money. We all remember the Geoffrey Robinson mortgage loan, which of course occasioned an earlier resignation, and the Hinduja passport. Where I disagree with the Minister is that you should conflate the updating of the disciplinary procedures of the other place and bringing forward legislation which is allowed to remove Mandelson's peerage. I am absolutely certain that were the government to bring forward a bill, it needn't be complex and hybrid as he suggested. It could be rushed through this House in a day, such as the appetite to make the point.
Madam Deputy Speaker, for the sake of clarity, can I just make it clear that neither I nor the government are here to defend Peter Mandelson. We are here to defend the integrity of this House and the other place, and to ensure that processes where they need updating are updated. On the question of legislation for individual members of the other place, the fact, I might say, Madam Deputy Speaker, is there's a queue. That's why the process needs to be updated to apply to all peers in the House of Lords, as opposed to the need to bring individual legislation, whether it's for Peter Mandelson or Michelle Mone.
Julie Sadiq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like the Chief Secretary, I am a parent of young children, and I know the Chief Secretary would have found it very difficult to stomach some of the details that came out over the weekend. And rightfully, so far the conversation here has been dominated about the actions of the men. But could I seriously ask the Chief Secretary, what is he doing to ensure that the victims, mostly children, of sexual violence and sexual assault is going to be heard by those in power, including the Prime Minister?
I thank my honourable friend for her question, and I'm sure there isn't one member of this House that doesn't agree with her about the levels of disgust that we feel in seeing the disclosures from the Epstein files. The House knows that the government is taking forward radical proposals for tackling violence against women and girls, and in respect of Jeffrey Epstein, is doing all that we can to ensure that people who do have information make it available to investigators.
Sir Christopher Chow.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Minister think that the deep involvement of Mandelson with Epstein shows that Epstein's victims were not only women and girls, but may also have included young men?
It wouldn't be appropriate for me to entertain that hypothetical question at the dispatch box, Madam Deputy Speaker. We obviously hope that that is not the case, but as I say, I am not here to speak for Peter Mandelson.
Andy MacDonald.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a disaster, and against the backdrop of the incredible abuse of young women for such a long time, it just fills the House with horror. But I must agree with the honourable member from North Dorset. This House would be minded to bring legislation, and quickly. But can I ask my right honourable friend, it would appear that Gordon Brown was very concerned in September of 2025 that there had been disclosure of information by Mandelson to Epstein that may have been used for commercial gain. He turns out to be right. So how is it that that error could occur within government? That information wasn't known. Can you assure the House that those matters will be given full attention in any inquiry, and that from this day on, full engagement will be had with the criminal authorities? Because as many people have said in this place already, the time has come for criminal prosecution.
My honourable friend is right to raise the concerns in the way he has. As I confirmed to the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the Cabinet Secretary did respond to Gordon Brown's request to search for documents in the Government Archive in relation to the sale of RBS assets to JP Morgan at that time. The review of documents at the time concluded that those documents did not exist in the Government Archive. It is now evident from the release of documents from the US Department for Justice that the emails that we have all seen account for what took place at the time, and that's why the Cabinet Secretary now is reviewing the archive again, not just in respect of that particular question, but in the round during the time that Peter Mandelson was a Labour Minister, and he'll be reporting to the Prime Minister as soon as he's been able to do that.
Speaker, in Cash for Questions, all the recent sexual harassment cases at Westminster, the police were called. They were called proactively by the government. Why is the government in this case conducting an inquiry without informing the Met Police? And if they're not, will they get on with it straight away? Because it's inevitably going to happen.
Yeah. As I have told the House, the Cabinet Secretary is currently looking at the Government Archives to see what documents are available and will advise the Prime Minister accordingly. If the government can be of assistance to any investigations in due course, of course it will do so.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are many aspects of this which are hugely troubling, and I just want to focus on one, which is the passing on by a serving Cabinet Minister to third parties of highly sensitive information. Clearly that's something that could amount to misconduct in public office, and I hope that the police do investigate that. But it does reveal these papers, doesn't it? A very casual relationship with probity for Mandelson and his apparent willingness to share highly sensitive information with third parties. Now, what concerns me in particular is, of course, that he has been in a very senior role in recent times. So I wonder if the Chief Secretary could confirm whether he or anyone else serving in government in a ministerial or advisory capacity has discussed in recent times, in the course of this government, information of a similar nature that could have been used to benefit third parties.
The information that became available over the preceding few days from the US Department for Justice is new information to the government.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I echo the remarks that have been made in this House this evening about the fact that it might be time for criminal proceedings to take place in this? I also think it's important when the government has made such a totem of tackling violence against women and girls, that they're seen to stand up for women and girls in this and encourage everyone who's been mentioned in this to cooperate with the American authorities and give any information that they have to the inquiries in the United States.
Good point, well made.
I agree wholeheartedly with the Honourable Lady, and the government has called for anybody with information to do just that.
Rachel Hopkins.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents will be horrified, like all of us, by the revelations regarding Peter Mandelson and the Epstein files. But they'd also be shocked to know that the government doesn't have the power to remove peerages. Yeah. So does the Chief Secretary agree with me that it's absolutely right to do whatever necessary to modernise procedures to allow for the removal of peers and their peerages when they've brought the other place into disrepute?
I think my honourable friend is exactly right, and that's why the government has written to the appropriate authorities in the other place today to request that that work is now started.
Stephen Flynn.
Speaker, I don't understand why the Minister, who I respect greatly, is standing there and speaking as though the government didn't know about the relationship and the connection between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein prior to appointing him as the ambassador to the United States. I can't understand why the Minister isn't standing at the dispatch box today saying that this House will sit until whatever hour is required in order to move legislation to strip him of his peerage. I cannot understand why the Minister is acting like the Labour Party have been proactive in relation to this, when they have known for months about Peter Mandelson's revelations and yet have allowed him to maintain a party membership throughout that time. And I cannot understand why half an hour ago the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom did not just apologise for his decision-making, his lack of judgment, and say that Peter Mandelson should be subject to a criminal investigation.
Neither the Labour Party nor the government, or indeed this House or the honourable member, knew about the information that was made available by the US Department for Justice only a matter of days ago. As soon as that information became available, the government has acted accordingly. And in respect of the previous decision of the Prime Minister to sack Peter Mandelson as the ambassador to the United States, the Prime Minister was very clear with this House and indeed the public that he did so quickly as soon as the extent and depth of the relationship became clear from the disclosure that took place. The Prime Minister relied on the information provided by Peter Mandelson at the time of his appointment. As soon as that information changed, the Prime Minister acted quickly and removed him from office.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The public is asking how on earth Peter Mandelson ever got to be appointed ambassador to the United States, given what was known. One would presume Peter Mandelson passed some sort of security check or vetting. But as well as an inquiry into Peter Mandelson's appointment, can the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister reassure this House and the public, on behalf of the Prime Minister, that everyone in number 10 who advocated for or had influence in securing Peter Mandelson's appointment, in spite of what was known about his relationship with Epstein, had security clearance? A key protection to guard against improper influence and exposure for our country.
All due process was followed. As the Prime Minister has made clear, for political appointments, it was clear that additional measures needed to be put into place, which have now been put into place. And I remind the honourable member in the House that the information that became available both at the time the Prime Minister sacked the former ambassador to the United States and in the last few days only became available to the Prime Minister and the government at the same time as everybody else.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Can the Minister not see that it's in the Labour Party's interest, as much as it is in the national interest, that this issue of stripping Mandelson of his peerage should be resolved as soon as possible, bring in the wider legislation subsequently? Now, he may be a little young to remember when the late John Prescott compared Mandelson to a scorpion in a jam jar that he was holding. But can the Minister explain to this House the fatal fascination of Labour leader after Labour leader in appointing this man to post after post with his checkered record of corruption and multiple resignations?
Julian.
I say to the right honourable gentleman and to the House that whether it's about Peter Mandelson or Michelle Mone or other peers who have brought the other place into disrepute, that there needs to be a process for the removal of members of the other place and their peerage. The government is making it very clear today that that should be conducted on a cross-party basis to ensure the integrity of the other place and our democracy in the future as it relates to all peers. And I would encourage members across the House and in the other place to make sure that those proposals are brought forward swiftly.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Mandelson's behaviour fell well below expected standards for a long time, but sadly, he was disgracefully allowed to resign very quietly. Even though he was sacked as the US ambassador last year, more action should have been taken last year. So I will ask the Chief Secretary to do everything that he can do to expedite legislation to remove all of the privileges from this awful man as soon as possible.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. The government stands ready to work with authorities in the House of Lords to update their procedures. As I've informed the House, we've written to the appropriate authorities in the other place today to start that process, and we hope to move as quickly as possible.
Manuela Pertigala.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to focus on the victims. the children and the young girls who were trafficked, will the government confirm that any UK-linked offences will be fully investigated, that all evidence will be acted upon, and that anyone implicated, whatever their status, will be pursued with the full force of the law, ensuring that victims and survivors will receive the justice and support that they deserve?
Yeah. I thank the Honourable Lady, and she's right that the victims of Jeffrey Epstein need to be at the centre of all of our attentions. The government will, of course, cooperate with any investigations that take place, and as we have said repeatedly, anybody with any information should make themselves available to investigators, whether here or overseas.
Alex McIntyre.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement this afternoon. Gloucester residents will rightly be angry and incredibly disgusted by the revelations that were revealed by the papers released by the American government over the weekend. And I think it's in the interest of this whole House that we get this place in order so that those who commit heinous acts, who align themselves with people like Jeffrey Epstein, are no longer in this place, so the public can have the trust that we are acting in their best interest. So can my right honourable friend confirm that he and the government will act at pace to ensure that that man is removed from the House of Lords, and can he update the House on the steps they've taken to improve the direct appointments process since he was removed as ambassador?
I thank my honourable friend for his question and share in his disgust at what has taken place. As I've said to the House of Lords must update its procedures to ensure that there are consequences for the behaviours of members in the other place that bring their House into disrepute. The House of Commons, this House, has in recent years been able to do that, and there is no reason why the other place should not, and the government stands ready to support the House of Lords in whichever way is necessary to make sure that's put into effect.
Robert Jenrick.
Appointing Peter Mandelson to our Premier Ambassadorship was always a grotesque error of judgment by the Prime Minister, given everything that we knew about this man. And now we're told that this man leaked confidential information to a convicted sex offender when he was a cabinet minister and took tens of thousands of pounds in secret backhanders. It is a total disgrace. Is the Minister really coming to the House today to say that he neither intends to bring forward primary legislation to deal with this now, but will write to the House of Lords and seek their support to modernise their procedures in months' time, and nor will he go proactively to the police and demand an investigation when Peter Mandelson has clearly broken the law and stands now accused of serious misconduct in a public office and should be tried for his offences?
As I've said repeatedly, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government will of course cooperate with any investigation that takes place and encourages everybody to do so. We stand ready to introduce legislation if required, at pace, to work with the House of Lords to update their procedures. We agree that that needs to happen and that it needs to happen quickly. And might I just gently say that when the Right Honourable Member was a member of the Conservative Party, at the point Peter Mandelson was first appointed to the ambassadorship in the United States, the official opposition didn't at that point object in any way.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his statement this afternoon. Jeffrey Epstein's crimes were utterly abhorrent. And our thoughts should always be with the women and girls whose lives were destroyed by him and his network. And the revelations over the weekend were utterly disgusting. Would the Chief Secretary agree with me that the Cabinet Secretary should undertake an immediate review into Peter Mandelson's actions when he was a government minister, particularly in relation to the issue raised by the previous Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, in relation to the potential and unacceptable disclosure of government papers and information when this country was battling a global financial crisis?
I agree wholeheartedly with my honourable friend. The Cabinet Secretary is now today reviewing the government archives to see what information is available at that time, not just in relation to the sale of RBS assets to JP Morgan as requested by the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, but more broadly during the time that Peter Mandelson was a Labour minister in the then government.
Esther McVeigh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, does the government believe Lord Mandel should be stripped of his peerage, yes or no? And if they do, they should bring forward primary legislation which would do just that, which they can do. And I'm afraid the Minister's excuse of a queue does not wash whatsoever. That being the case, will they bring forward this legislation for the disgraced Lord Mandelson, their friend? Because if they don't, and he does keep his title, despite Andrew Mountbatten Windsor being stripped of his, what rank hypocrisy? What further can this government do to add further stain to their tarnished reputation?
As I've said repeatedly, Madam Deputy Speaker, neither the Labour Party nor this government seeks to defend Peter Mandelson, as the Honourable Lady implies in her question. The leader of the opposition has herself called for Michelle Mone's peerage to be removed. The point I make is that that can't happen either because the processes are not up to date in the House of Lords. It would be better to bring forward changes to ensure that the rules can be applied to all members of the House of Lords in these circumstances, whether Peter Mandelson or Michelle Mone, and we stand ready to do so.
Andrew Lewin.
Speaker, can I thank the Chief Secretary for coming to Parliament at the first opportunity to address this issue. Epstein's crimes were vile, and I can't begin to imagine how all these latest revelations have compounded the pain for all of the women and girls who were victims. Many in this House have already spoken powerfully about our collective alarm at the revelations in the last few days of government information being passed to Epstein in 2009. I fully support the decision to have an investigation, but for public trust, can the Chief Secretary reassure me that the Cabinet Secretary will be given everything he needs to make sure this investigation moves forward at pace?
I agree with my honourable friend, and again to reiterate that if any minister was found to be forwarding government information in that way, they would be quickly removed from post under the rules that we have today and could be subject to recall to their own constituencies from the House authorities here. In respect of the Cabinet Secretary's work, of course officials from the Propriety and Ethics team and elsewhere in the Cabinet Office are supporting his investigations today to review what documents are available in the archive, because the Prime Minister has made it very clear that he wishes for the Cabinet Secretary to report back to him as a matter of urgency.
Luke Taylor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the files released on Friday are a horrific record of the relationships between the rich and the powerful, including Elon Musk, Donald Trump. We've seen mention of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and, of course, Peter Mandelson. It's horrific, and we, as other members have mentioned, we must keep the victims at the very forefront of our minds. We've seen the discussion of the email that Peter Mandelson sent to him about business issues, and then there's a second one in 2010 where he gave a preview of the £500 billion bailout that was imminent. In light of these, will the government be proactive in encouraging a police investigation, but can I also ask whether they're in discussions with the US Department of Justice for unredacted emails and potentially documents that have been withheld and not released yet to further detail the offending, but also whether he will republish Peter Mandelson's register of interests back from his election as an MP in 1992 through to 2010.
I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the question of the register of interest is for the House and not for the government, but I'm sure that the House authorities have heard the question from the honourable member. In terms of investigations, the answer is yes. Everybody, whether the government or individuals involved or with any knowledge, should cooperate with any investigation, because, as he said at the start of his question, if the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes are at the heart of all of our thinking, the answer has to be justice.
Ian Burns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The latest information appears to show Peter Mandelson, when a minister, worked alongside one of the world's most notorious paedophiles, conspiring against the interests of the British people in pursuit of money, power and influence. Such detail strengthens the case for the Hillsborough law to hold those in power properly to account. Under this law, ministers who use their office to gain a benefit, financial, reputational or otherwise, or cause detriment to others while knowing their conduct is improper, could face up to 10 years imprisonment. It cannot come quickly enough. But can I ask the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister a simple question? Will the government commit to an immediate investigation into who knew what and when about Peter Mandelson before and during his disastrous appointment as Ambassador to the United States?
Yeah, well said.
Can I congratulate my honourable friend for all of his tireless campaigning on the Hillsborough law and reaffirm the government's commitment to bringing that legislation back to the House as soon as possible. In respect of the appointment of Peter Mandelson as the Ambassador to the United States, and then the Prime Minister's decision to sack Peter Mandelson when more information had become available, the Prime Minister has spoken at length to that at the dispatch box here in the House and in public.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Labour appointee Lord Mandelson has been a pivotal figure in the Prime Minister's leadership project. And this is now a damage limitation exercise for the government. There is a deep irony, I think, in that the government can appoint people to the House of Lords, but they can't clear up after their own mess. So why hasn't the government referred this to the police? And does he admit that this is doing grave harm to the confidence of the public in the accountability of our democratic institutions?
The Cabinet Secretary is, as we speak, Madam Deputy Speaker, reviewing the government archive to see what documents we have available in relation to the time that Peter Mandelson served as a Labour Minister. As I've informed the House, the release of documents from the US Department for Justice over the preceding few days was new information to the government, and we will do all that we can, both to highlight the information that we have, but also to cooperate with any investigation that may then take place.
Matt Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement. I wonder if he agrees that without this legislation that we've talked about being brought through swiftly and quickly, that actually what we're doing is running the risk of diminishing any confidence that victims of serious sexual abuse and other violence actually has in all ministers and people who actually make decisions and laws.
I think my honourable friend is right that the public expect that if you break the law or the rules, there should be consequences for that behaviour. In this House, that is the case. In the House of Lords, it is not the case. That's why the government is encouraging the appropriate authorities in the House of Lords to come forward with proposals to change that. And if the government is required to assist in any way, including making time available in this House to do so, we will.
Thank you,
Madam Deputy Speaker. There are two issues here. One is the connection of a member of the House of Lords to a convicted paedophile who is, let's not forget, not the only Labour appointee recently made who's been connected to a convicted paedophile. Lord Matthew Doyle, who was appointed only recently, has maintained a persistent connection with a convicted paedophile as well. Would the Chief Secretary agree that it isn't enough to be referring this to the Cabinet Secretary? The police should be called immediately, because what we're seeing right now is misconduct in public office. This goes all the way to the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, and the possibility of destruction of evidence and obscuring a future prosecution is now a raising impossibility, and it is being masked by his government.
Yeah.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to refute in the strongest possible terms any accusation that the government would seek to interfere or block any investigation in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. It's absolutely wrong to suggest that documents would be made unavailable or deleted. The Cabinet Secretary is today reviewing the government archives from the time in question, and as I've said, will comply with any investigation that then takes place. And I think the right honourable gentleman must know that to accuse me or other parts of the government of misdemeanour in the way he has is wholly unsatisfactory, and might I say, out of character.
Dr. Peter Brinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I can recall the description of the scorpion in the jam jar. And Mandelson surely does have some sort of a self-destruct chip inside his head. It was reported in the Times this afternoon that Mr Butler, the Downing Street advisor to Gordon Brown, said that the alleged leaked memo containing highly sensitive market information from Mandelson presented an unimaginable breach of trust. So does the Minister agree with me that this looks like political insider trading on a grand scale? And would he support not only an independent inquiry, but a criminal investigation?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that releasing government information in and of itself, let alone in respect for personal or commercial gain, is wrong. and a breach of the rules that we must all comply with. And if that is the case, then there should be appropriate investigations and consequences for that behaviour.
Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm afraid it is untenable to suggest that what was already known of Mandelson's simpering after the conviction of Epstein was not enough to make him inappropriate to be ambassador, and I did object from day one on that exact basis. It is on Hansard. I'm afraid there were a number of questions to the Cabinet Secretary, to whom I wrote on the 5th of December with the Honourable Member for East Grinstead, that still have not been answered. I'd be grateful for the answers today. Yeah. Did Mandelson receive a taxpayer-funded severance payment after stepping down as ambassador? If so, how much? Was that paid by taxpayers? Will details of his contract be published in the name of transparency? Was any NDA agreement signed in any way? And when did Lord Mandelson's salary formally cease? These are not unreasonable questions. We're almost 2 months on, and I have had no response from the Cabinet Secretary, and that gives me enormous concern.
To the first part of the Honourable Lady's question, as the Prime Minister made very clear, when the extent and depth of the relationship between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein post his conviction became clear, the Prime Minister moved very quickly indeed to sack Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States. The Prime Minister was not aware of that at the point of his appointment, and Peter Mandelson made certain commitments to the Prime Minister that obviously turned out to be untrue. In respect to the Honourable Lady's letter to the Cabinet Secretary, I will feed that back to the Cabinet Secretary and ensure that she gets appropriate answers to her questions.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Chief Secretary explain what steps this government has taken to make sure that the voices of the victims and the survivors of sexual abuse and violence are heard by those in power?
My honourable friend knows that the government has committed to reducing violence against women and girls and has brought forward recently a strategy for how we'll be working across government to do just that over the years ahead. And specifically in respect of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, we will continue to do all that we can to support any investigations to ensure justice for those victims and encourage everybody else with any information to do just the same.
Monica Harding.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I asked the Prime Minister in this chamber, on behalf of my constituents in East Morton, who were asking the same thing, why Peter Mandelson had been appointed at all as our most senior ambassador, given the knowledge of his links with Epstein. By September, it was clear just how close that relationship had got, and yet the PM didn't immediately sack him, but there still wasn't a full investigation of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. So why is that investigation only happening now? And given that the Prime Minister stated his commitment to restoring trust in public life, how does the Minister equate that with his delay, with his promise to uphold these standards and the delay in investigating it?
I'm not sure that I agree with the Honourable Lady that there's been any undue delay in investigations one way or another. Peter Mandelson made commitments to the Prime Minister at the time of his appointment that his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was different to that which then became evident when documents were released. As soon as the extent and depth of that relationship became clear, the Prime Minister sacked Peter Mandelson within a matter of days from his post as ambassador to the United States. Now that even more information has become available, the Cabinet Secretary is reviewing what documents is available in the government archive and will of course comply with any investigation that may then take place.
Chris Vins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement. In particular, his focus on the victims of these terrible crimes is absolutely right. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, whatever cover rosette you wear, the majority of us who come to this House come here to represent our constituencies, and I hope that I show that I represent my constituency of Harlow as well as I can every single day. So when we hear of an MP, and in this case a government minister, representing the interests of outside bodies, in this case a vile paedophile, it is absolutely disgraceful and very upsetting for us who come here for the right reasons. Can I ask the Chief Secretary what he will do, working with the PM, to ensure that we have a strengthened ministerial code so this can never happen again?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The government, and specifically the Prime Minister, has already strengthened the ministerial code that we are all subject to in this House today and made the ethics advisor independent, giving him the authority to investigate ministers freely without requiring permission from the Prime Minister, as was the case under the previous administration. That has already shown to be effective where ministers have had to stand down as a consequence of breaches of the ministerial code. It is right and proper that we have robust rules in this House for ministers and for members, and it is about time that we have similar processes in the House of Lords as well.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Try as you might, the Prime Minister cannot escape his responsibility in this, the latest scandal to engulf Peter Mandelson. Ordering a very limited inquiry or investigation now into his activities is pretty meaningless. What we need is an investigation which is fully independent of government or the Labour Party, which has the scope not just to investigate Mandelson, but also those who put him in the House of Lords, those who promoted him to being the UK Ambassador to the United States, and those who have done everything they possibly can to protect him over several decades, despite his scandal-ridden career. Does the Minister not agree?
The Prime Minister has acted at every stage with integrity. It is Peter Mandelson who has to be accountable for the actions of Peter Mandelson. And to suggest that the Prime Minister should be responsible for the actions of Peter Mandelson is obviously wrong-headed. As I've said in my statement to the House today, Peter Mandelson, who is no longer a member of the Labour Party, should be accountable for his actions and should account for them.
Dr Caroline Johnson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's disgraceful the government are choosing not to bring forward legislation to remove Peter Mandelson from the House of Lords. It's entirely within their gift to do so. The public know this. The public will be not only alarmed by the fact that the government are not doing this, but they'll question the motivation for their delay. But if I could ask the Minister a specific question, on what date exactly did Peter Mandelson cease to be paid by the government?
As the Honourable Lady knows from the debate in the House today, it is not that we don't wish to take action in respect of Peter Mandelson, it's that we respect action to be taken that affects all members of the House of Lords, whether it's Peter Mandelson or other peers who need to be removed from the House of Lords as a consequence of their behaviour. We stand ready to act swiftly on that basis and have asked the House of Lords to bring forward proposals to do just that.
Chris Law.
To speak of revelations in the press that Peter Mandelson was leaking confidential government secrets to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein whilst Business Secretary should be more than enough to evidence to warrant expelling him from the House of Lords, and yet we hear today that's not going to happen through legislation. Sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is yet another scandal in the House of Lords, and whilst Labour's promised major Lords reform over 100 years, time and again they've kicked the can down the road. So does the Chief Secretary agree with many in this House that rather than desperately trying to reform what's an embarrassingly broken system, it is time for the House of Lords to be finally abolished?
The Honourable Member knows that the Government has stated and believes that Peter Mandelson should not be a member of the House of Lords and should not use his title, but he is right that the rules need to be updated to allow for that action to be implemented by the House of Lords. We've written to the House of Lords authorities today to say that that work must begin, and the Government stands ready to support them in doing that.
Dr Andrew Mirison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To be fair to Peter Mandelson, I think the crustacean in John Prescott's jam jar was in fact a crab and not a scorpion. Madam Deputy Speaker, in our system, it is very unusual for ambassadors and high commissioners to be appointed outside the ranks of the civil service, and for pretty good reason. When that does happen, and particularly when the appointee is a politician with baggage, as here, the appointer has to own it, because he has made that decision, in this case against advice. What does the Minister think this fiasco says about the judgment of our Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister's judgment was made clear when, as soon as information became available that he had been misled by Peter Mandelson, he sacked him.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The actions of Peter Mandelson are a disgrace, and I support proposals to remove him without delay. But he's not the only British person implicated in the appalling Epstein files. So what is the government doing to ensure that all those linked to Mandelson, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and any political, public or civic figure are fully investigated here, not just cooperating with US authorities, but taking action here for all the crimes committed on our soil?
The Honourable Lady knows that it's not the Government that instigates criminal investigations. It's for the criminal prosecution service and the police to take those decisions independently of ministers. But whether in respect of UK investigations or investigations in the United States, the government's made it very clear that all individuals should comply with those investigations and make any information available to ensure that the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's acts are able to seek justice.
Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister sacked Lord Mandelson as the American ambassador, ministers came to this House and that dispatch box, and I pointed out to them that for the whole time that he was our ambassador, he had been subject to politically fatal compromat, which therefore left him open to leverage, as it finally played out. And I said that if we found out that he was spying for Russia or China, we'd be turning his time in office inside out, every single aspect of it, in order to find out the truth. And the government said, well, he's been sacked. So does the Minister regret the fact that following his sacking, they didn't do the sort of due diligence and inquiries which might have unearthed the documents from the Department of Justice?
To be clear, the documents produced by the United States Department of Justice were not available to the government until they were released a number of days ago. And as soon as they have become available, we've instigated processes within our own authorities to make sure that we have a clear view of what information was available to government at the time and to comply with any investigations that may take place.
Rachel Gilmore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as so many of my colleagues have rightly said, our thoughts today should be first and foremost with the victims. And I would hope that no political party in this chamber would use it as an excuse to cover the backs of some of their less fragrant members of the House of Lords. The fact that Lord Mandelson, as ever, was only interested in the ruthless pursuit of financial gain will come as no surprise, as a surprise to no one. Number 10 now saying that Mandelson should indeed lose his peerage. I have to say I wholeheartedly concur. However, isn't it staggering that members of this House seemed more aware of Mr Mandelson's skeletons in the wardrobe than the Prime Minister who appointed him?
As far as I'm aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, no member of this House had access to the information recently published by the United States Department for Justice or the documents that were released at the time the Prime Minister sacked the ambassador to the United States. The Prime Minister has been very clear to this House previously that had he had access to that information, he would not have appointed him in the first place.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister indicated that Mandelson assured the Prime Minister that his relationship with Epstein was of a different nature. Can he explain what sort of relationship with a convicted paedophile would be acceptable in this role? And will the Prime Minister come back to the House to make a specific statement on the advice he received regarding Mandelson's conduct?
The information that became available in September, which led to the sacking of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, made it clear for the first time to all of us and to the Prime Minister that Peter Mandelson not only remained a friend with Jeffrey Epstein following his conviction, but had actively mentored and encouraged him on how to challenge that conviction and how to push back against it. That was one example. There is now a list of examples of how the depth and extent of the relationship following the conviction of Jeffrey Epstein, between Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson, was unacceptable. If the Prime Minister had known that at the time Peter Mandelson was being considered to be ambassador to the United States, he would not have appointed him, and as soon as the Prime Minister became aware of that information, he sacked him.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Epstein files suggest that Lord Mandelson was prepared to lobby in the United States for a policy position in contradiction to the position of Her Majesty's government, which he was then serving in 2009 as Business Secretary. How will this revelation encourage the government to find out where else Lord Mandelson has lobbied against his government while serving last year as British Ambassador to the United States? And can the Chief Secretary find out where in US policy towards the UK this lobbying against British government policy is revealed?
As I've informed the House today, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Cabinet Secretary is currently reviewing all documentation that relates to Peter Mandelson's time as a minister in the last Labour government to see what information is available today, and will comply with any investigations that take place as a consequence of that in the future. he is right that any minister acting against the collective decisions of Cabinet and against the government is a breach of the rules and is unacceptable behaviour. And if any minister were to do that today, they would be quickly dismissed.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement today. It is indeed very disturbing to read of the role of Peter Mandelson when holding high office in government. Just to remind the Chief Secretary, he was also the EU Trade Commission for 5 years. I believe that needs investigating as well, because how far does this go? I can also ask, it's my understanding that the latest releases may have made public victims' names that weren't previously released. So can the Chief Secretary please assure this House that any British victims who have been made public will have support and help to make their way through what could be a re-traumatising experience with this time press invasion and interference? Thank you.
I was not aware of that issue, so I thank the honourable gentleman for bringing it to my attention. And of course, if there are any British victims affected by the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, whether in relation to the latest publication of documents or otherwise, government services stand ready to be of support to those victims and to ensure that they can seek justice.
And that concludes the statement. Point of order, Sir David Davies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Wednesday, 21st of January, before my contribution to the debate on the Northern Ireland remedial order, I omitted to refer to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Now, that was an oversight, as it includes a declaration of a major contribution from Sir Michael Gooley in support of the campaign to protect military veterans from lawfare, for which I am the custodian. That was a mistake on my part, for which I obviously apologise to the House.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for giving notice of his point of order. On the first point, he has now drawn the House's attention to his relevant declaration in the Register. Point of order, Sean Woodcock.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Last month, the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor paid a visit to my constituency without giving notice to myself as the local member. I'd be very grateful if the Deputy Speaker could provide me with advice to prevent such discourtesy and disrespect taking place in the future.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving notice of that point of order. As the leaflet on courtesies makes clear, members should inform colleagues in advance if they intend to visit another member's constituency. It is deeply discourteous to fail to do so. Point of order, Dr Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been listening to the last debate very carefully, and I wondered if you could help me with a procedural question. Would it be orderly for the government, if it wished, to bring forward legislation as soon as it wished to do so, to remove Peter Mandelson of his peerage?
I thank the honourable member for her point of order. However, introduction of legislation is a matter for the government. We now move to the programme motion. Programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill, consideration of Lord's amendments.
No.
I can inform the House that nothing in the Lord's amendments engages Commons financial privilege. We will begin with the government motion to agree the Lord's Amendment 1, with which it will be convenient to consider all other Lord's amendments as on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am delighted that the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill has returned to this House for consideration of Lord's amendments. I thank members of both Houses for their careful scrutiny and for the constructive and collaborative approach that has taken place throughout the bill's passage. I also place on record my thanks to Baroness Chapman of Darlington for leading the bill expertly through the other place. In today's debate, we will seek to address the amendments that were made by the government there, and I also thank all of those in the other place who have been involved in debates on this bill. Before I speak to the amendments, I want to remind the House that the passage of this bill is a vital part of delivering the UK's international obligations under the BBNJ agreement. It will strengthen the global framework for protecting biodiversity in areas of the ocean beyond national jurisdiction, improve how we manage environmental impacts in these areas, and help ensure that the benefits arising from marine genetic resources are shared fairly. I am pleased to inform the House that as of the 17th of January, the BBNJ agreement has now entered into force. Following royal assent of this bill and subsequent secondary legislation, which will be passed in the coming months, the UK will ratify the agreement and intends to play a leading role at the first Conference of the Parties, which will take place at some point before the 16th of January 2027. Turning to the amendments from the other place. Today, the House is asked to consider a package of 12 amendments, all of which were put forward by the Government. These amendments relate to devolution and are designed to support effective implementation of the BBNJ agreement across the whole of the United Kingdom, while respecting the devolution settlements and ensuring that devolved ministers are appropriately engaged where devolved competence is affected. I'm very happy to give way.
Speaker, can I thank the Minister for what the Minister is putting forward. I know that Part 2 of the bill contains a specific exception for fishing and that the new regulations do not apply to the use of a UK craft for fishing if it is done under a valid licence under the Fisheries Act 2020. I've been contacted by some of the organisations back home in Northern Ireland, and so does the Minister not agree that it's essential that the devolved administrations enshrine this in acknowledging that the fishing industry is reliant on the ability to continue to fish in all current areas? In other words, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's important that the administrations, the Northern Ireland Assembly in particular, does what this bill says, because if it doesn't do that, then the Northern Ireland fishing organisation will find themselves at a disadvantage. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his question. It is indeed important that all our devolved administrations, as well as the UK government, are abiding by the agreement, and I thank him for his interest and his engagement in this important bill. I am really grateful as well to those, to all of those who we have been engaging with through the passage of this bill. And working closely with ministers and officials in the devolved governments, we agreed at the introduction of the bill that legislative consent motion that the legislative consent motion process is engaged for Scotland and Northern Ireland to varying extents by Part 2, 3 and 4 of the bill. The Government has been in sustained discussions with both of these devolved governments to seek consent for the bill, and I can confirm to the House that motions on consent have been passed by the Scottish Parliament and the Northern Ireland Assembly. Lord's Amendments 1 and 4 provide Scottish ministers and Northern Ireland Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs with concurrent powers to make regulations within devolved competence corresponding to the powers to make provision granted to the Secretary of State under Clause 9 and Clause 11 of the bill. Amendments 2 and 5 provide the procedure for those powers.
As one understands it, the BBNJ is dealing with matters primarily in international waters, and of course devolved institutions have no say in those matters. So as to broaden an understanding of the bill, what type of regulations is it anticipated that DERA, the local stormont department, would be making in consequence of this bill?
I thank the honourable member, and what I will say is that following the ratification of of the agreement, that we will be participating in the future discussions in relation to the implementation of the agreement, and there will continue to be further conversations. I think the important point I do want to make, and I think this is relevant for the work we've been doing with Scotland, with Wales and with Northern Ireland, is that it does reflect how our UK government officials and devolved officials are already working together effectively in practice, and including in relation to consultation and effective delivery. And I know that these will be conversations that do continue. If I can continue with my remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to Amendments 3 and 6, these place a duty on the Secretary of State to consult Scottish ministers and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland before exercising powers in clauses 9 and 11, where regulations engaged devolve matters. This duty does not apply where the Secretary of State considers that regulations need to be made urgently for the purposes of implementing emergency measures adopted under Article 24(1) of the BBNJ agreement. This approach ensures that devolved governments are engaged in advance of regulations being made, enables them to make their own provision on devolved aspects where they wish to do so, and reflects their responsibilities while supporting timely and effective implementation of the agreement. Lord's Amendment 7, I will give way.
Shannon.
Speaker, the reason why I'm asking, because I've been asked these questions by the fishing organisations back home, I want to put them on the record, and I wish to just very quickly. The bill enables the creation of internationally agreed MPAs in the high seas. If a Northern Ireland vessel operates in these international waters, it may face new restrictions on where it can fish to protect vulnerable habitats and species like sharks and whales. Does the Minister not agree that we need to ensure that MPAs are not created without the fishing industry, that's the sector itself, the fishing organisations, the fish producers, and that their opinions carry weight and not simply just a checkbox exercise? I just want to put it on record, please, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member, and indeed he does continue to put on the record his concerns, and he will know that as we move forward following ratification, there will be detailed conversations we will continue to have, and it is important that that the rules and regulations as we move forward will also be clear for all to be operating by. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was just referencing our approach and how we've been moving forward on the bill, and to ensure that devolved governments are engaged in advance of regulations being made, and that does enable them to be able to make their own provision on devolved aspects where they may wish to do so. And we continue to work closely together to support timely and effective implementation of the agreement. Lord's Amendment 7 inserts a new clause after clause 17 that makes changes to the Marine Works Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations 2017 to ensure that the UK meets its obligations under the BBNJ agreement in relation to the Scottish marine licensable activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The UK Government will be amending its own environmental impact assessment regulations, and Scottish Government officials have worked closely with UK counterparts to draft corresponding provisions. Accordingly, Amendments 8 and 9 also limit the power in Clause 18 to only implementing Article 38 standards or guidelines, as a wider power is no longer required in light of other changes that will be made directly through the bill. Lord's Amendments 10 and 11 ensure that under Clause 22, which sets out procedures for the making of regulations under the Act, does not apply to regulations made under clauses introduced by Lord's Amendments 1 and 4. Instead, the procedures set out in Government Amendments 2 and 5 respectively apply. Finally, Lord's Amendment 12 amends Clause 25 so that the clause introduced by Amendment 7 comes into force on such a day as the Secretary of State appoints by regulations rather than upon royal assent. This change ensures a consistent approach across the bill with regards to the environmental impact assessment regulations that are being amended. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government's objective is to implement the BBNJ agreement effectively across the whole of the United Kingdom, and to do so in a way that respects the devolution settlement and supports continued constructive collaboration with devolved governments. I therefore commend these 12 Lords' amendments to the House, and I urge members to support them. I beg to move.
The question is that this House agrees with the Lords and their Amendment 1. I call the Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We on this side of the House recognise the importance of the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill and the shared international ambition to protect the world's oceans and marine ecosystems. The opposition supports the principle of effective global cooperation in this area, and we want this legislation to succeed. However, it is precisely because of the bill's significance, its reach across devolved administrations and its potential financial and regulatory consequences that it demands the highest standards of scrutiny and clarity. It is in that constructive spirit that I wish to raise a number of questions for the Minister today. I hope in the same constructive spirit she seeks to answer them fully. We know that the Government tabled quite a number of amendments to the bill at report stage in the House of Lords. Those amendments are before us today. I must say it is rather disappointing that the Government needed to do this at such a late stage in the bill's passage, and as my noble friend Lord Callanan said in the other place, tabling amendments at such a late stage was not conducive to the best Lord's scrutiny. Does the Minister accept that the work with the devolved administrations, which led to the tabling of these amendments, should have taken place earlier? And are lessons going to be learned for future legislation? On the new clauses, on the clauses consultation with Scotland and Northern Ireland to be inserted after clauses 9 and 12, can the Minister confirm that this definitely does not stray into legislative consent territory? Can the Minister also set out what would happen if Scottish or Northern Irish ministers do not approve of measures during the consultation process? Regarding the new clause to be inserted after clause 12 relating to the new regulation making power, what would happen if, say, the Scottish Government decided to take a divergent path or set up a system that puts itself at odds with the UK Government position? Is there a risk to the operability of the system here? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government's own impact assessment found that this bill will generate compliance costs for those involved in the collection and utilisation of marine genetic resources and related digital sequence information. What steps are the Government taking to ensure that these costs aren't prohibitive to the very research we are hoping to promote through the bill? While there are still many unanswered questions about enforcement, it is hard to see how the compliance, licensing and enforcement will be cheap. What level of resource is going to be put in to enforcing the regime? A Ways and Means resolution is required for this bill precisely because it will lead to costs to the public purse. So what assessment has the Government made of the value for money in this respect, and what is the cost-benefit ratio? The final stage impact assessment also makes reference to potential future costs if emergency legislation is needed to respond to any further decisions by the Convention of Biological Diversity. Can the Minister clarify the parameters here? What it is they are anticipating, how much money do they assess might be involved, and are they planning to ensure the risk of unintended consequences is mitigated? Finally, it would be impossible not to mention the tension between the Government's ambitions with this bill and its surrender of the Chagos Islands, which may well see the dismantling of an exemplar marine protected area. Can she tell us exactly what undertaking Mauritius has given to the MPA? Any red lines the government has clearly set out, and precisely what continuing role Britain will play in MPA management per terms of the treaty. For example, has the government had any discussions about preventing damaging Chinese trawler boats from accessing the MPA? Madam Deputy Speaker, we all share the objective of protecting our oceans and safeguarding biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Indeed, that is why it was a Conservative government that first signed up to the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement. But good intentions on their own are not enough. This House is entitled to clear answers on scrutiny, devolution, operability, cost, enforcement and value for money, as well as honesty about how this bill sits alongside the government's wider actions on marine protection in the British overseas territories. Until ministers can provide that clarity and reassurance, there remains a real risk that a bill designed to lead internationally will instead create uncertainty at home. I urge the Minister to fully respond to the questions raised today so that the House can be confident that this legislation is workable, proportionate and worthy of the ambitions the government has for it.
Chair of the Select Committee, Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome this bill, the introduction of which had the happy coincidence of fulfilling one of the government's commitments and satisfying one of the Environmental Audit Committee recommendations at the same time. This landmark legislation will lay the groundwork for protecting the marine environment and the wildlife that inhabit it, which lie beyond the control of individual nations. As the government's National Security Assessment on Global Biodiversity Loss, published last week, set out in stark terms natural ecosystems such as the ocean and the Amazon rainforest are at risk of collapsing. The resulting crop failures, intensified natural disasters and conflict and political instability are highly likely, the report said, to threaten UK national security and prosperity. It is vital that the UK take leadership on the international stage to tackle global biodiversity loss and climate change. I welcome this government's commitment to multilateral cooperation on ocean governance, and I look forward to this bill receiving royal assent, enabling the UK to ratify the BBNJ agreement. It's absolutely true to say that the initial indication of the government supporting this agreement was made by the previous government. And I think it was disappointing that over the 18 months or so after that commitment was made, that we never actually got the legislation back here. And so I welcome the fact that this government has taken forward this important measure. The UK also makes an important contribution to global efforts to halt environmental decline through its international funding for climate finance, 1/3 of which is earmarked for nature-based solutions to climate change. However, to date, there has been limited indication of the government's next steps regarding the next 5-year ICF budget due to commence in April. And the government has also failed so far to invest in the Tropical Forests Forever facility and leverage further private finance into that innovative fund, protecting forests in perpetuity. So whilst the Minister has rightly championed our contribution to this impressive act of international cooperation, does she agree that we have more to do to ensure that we retain the UK's hard-earned reputation as a global leader in the field of international climate action? Can the Minister confirm that the UK will continue to contribute to protecting and restoring global ecosystems by maintaining its international funding for climate, including for nature projects in the next round of funding? So, in summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this important legislation that this government has acted on where previous governments merely talked about it, and look forward to them to continuing in this positive direction on the other areas I referred to.
I call Liberal Democrat spokesperson Ros Savage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Liberal Democrats strongly welcome this bill, and it's wonderful to hear the support for it from across this House. The Global Oceans Treaty is one of the most significant environmental agreements of our time. It is currently the world's only viable pathway to meeting the global 30 by 30 target to protect at least 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. And the scale of that challenge is monumental. Right now, less than 1% of the high seas is fully protected. That's less than 1 penny in the pound of the global ocean. And this is the gap that this treaty begins to close. The ocean underpins everything. It feeds billions of people, absorbs around a quarter of global carbon emissions, regulates our weather and supports livelihoods across the world. Yet it's under extraordinary and growing pressure from overfishing, plastic pollution and climate change. I've seen those pressures firsthand. Rowing solo across 3 oceans, I saw both the beauty of the high seas and the damage that we're doing to them. Out there beyond national borders, it can also feel beyond human laws. But this treaty is about bringing rules, responsibility and stewardship to those waters, and also discharges one of the commitments made by this government to me during the discussions around my private member's bill, the Climate and Nature Bill, and for that I thank them.